Remember 2012? It was a time of immense optimism, the London Olympics, and the peak of a global commodity boom. That's when Eike Batista, a name synonymous with Brazilian ambition, swaggered onto the Forbes list as the seventh richest human alive. We're not just talking about being wealthy, we're talking about a man with a staggering $30 billion, a veritable flotilla of super yachts parked in his living room, and a bold, almost audacious promise. He would soon top the global ranking, eclipsing Carlos Slim to become the richest man on earth. He was the living embodiment of Brazil's economic miracle. Fast forward just 18 short months, and the same man was flat broke, his once mighty companies crumbling into a heap of bankruptcy and scandal. Brazilian police were literally seizing his prized Lamborghinis and jet skis, not for a joyride, but to help cover a court-ordered fine, a public spectacle of humiliation. One journalist, utterly stunned by the speed of it all, called it the fastest destruction of wealth in modern history. Tonight, we're going to pull back the curtain and track exactly how this boy from Rio transformed into a national hero, why sophisticated global investors showered him with an almost unbelievable amount of cash, and, more dramatically, the precise moment that glittering, larger-than-life dream gushed utterly dry. Eike Batista was born in 1956, the son of a respected mining executive who once led the state-owned giant Vale. But don't let that pedigree fool you into thinking he had an easy ride. His entrepreneurial spirit was a fire lit from a very young age. While his classmates were out on the football pitch, Eike was busy selling candy on the school bus, not just for pocket money, but meticulously calculating his profit margins. He wasn't just selling sweets, he was learning the fundamentals of business, understanding supply and demand, and most importantly, discovering an intoxicating love for turning a quick buck. This wasn't just a childhood hobby, it was an early, self-taught masterclass in commerce, an apprenticeship that set the stage for the colossus he would later become. At just 23, after dropping out of university in Germany, armed with little more than a borrowed pickup truck and a burning ambition, he landed deep in the Amazon. His mission was as simple as it was dangerous: to buy raw gold directly from the garimperos, those gritty, determined prospectors toiling in the mud and heat of the jungle, and then flip it to refineries in the big cities. It was a high-stakes, high-risk game, fraught with peril from swindlers, disease, and the lawless environment itself. But Eike thrived on the adrenaline. Within a mere year and a half, he had banked his first $1 million, a fortune at the time. The trick, he later revealed, was disarmingly simple, almost folksy. I paid today, I delivered tomorrow, and I never promised what I couldn't load. It was a philosophy built on speed, absolute reliability, and a keen understanding of logistics, a mantra that would define his early successes and build a reputation for getting things done. By the early 80s, this relentless drive had helped him forge a small but formidable conglomerate. It wasn't just gold anymore. His operations now shipped ore, built crucial generators to power remote sites, and even financed wildcat wells, those speculative high-reward drilling ventures that are the stuff of legend. Wall Street hadn't quite caught wind of his name yet, but Brazilian lenders, they absolutely loved his swagger, his daring, his sheer, unshakable confidence. He was the epitome of the audacious local entrepreneur. And then the commodity boom arrived in 2004, a global economic supercycle that Batista was perfectly, almost preternaturally, positioned to ride. He deftly stitched his disparate holdings into the now iconic EBX group and began pitching a vision so grand, so compelling, it was almost impossible to resist. Brazil, he declared, would supply the entire world with iron, gold, oil, electricity, and the critical ports to move it all. And he, Eike Batista, would own every single link in that incredibly lucrative chain. Investors, mesmerized by the sheer scale of his ambition and the promise of untold riches, practically queued around the block for a piece of his story. Batista, ever the showman, listed an astonishing 6 companies on the São Paulo exchange in less than 5 years. Each one carried a slick, distinctive ticker symbol, always ending in that mysterious, potent letter, X. There was OGX for oil and gas, MPX for power, LLX for logistics, and MMX for mining. With a knowing wink to a captivated audience of analysts and journalists, he explained that the X stood for multiplication. And for a time, the market, utterly enchanted, wholeheartedly obliged. At the absolute peak of his empire, his firms were trading for more than 60 times their projected earnings. Think about that for a moment, 60 times. It was a valuation built not on current performance or tangible profits, but on pure, unadulterated hope and the promise of an exponential future. He financed this dizzying expansion not through solid existing cash flow, but by pledging future production, a gamble of truly epic proportions. It was a house of cards built on resources that were, for the moment, still hypothetical. When reporters, perhaps sensing a slight lack of tangible detail in his grand pronouncements, pressed him for specifics on geology or engineering, he'd simply flash that dazzling, confident grin and quip, "The proof will come out of the ground." It was a line designed to inspire belief, to brush aside doubt, and to keep the river of investment capital flowing. The undisputed centerpiece of this burgeoning empire, the jewel in his crown, was Porto do Açu. This wasn't just any port. It was a private, colossal undertaking, literally carved out of a salt-sprayed, undeveloped coastline northeast of Rio de Janeiro. Batista boasted with his characteristic bravado that Açu would soon handle more cargo than Rotterdam, one of the busiest and most efficient ports in the entire world. He poured an astounding $5 billion into this monumental project, painstakingly carving berths deep enough to accommodate the colossal Valemax ore ships, vessels so massive they could barely fit anywhere else on the planet. Construction crews worked 24-hour shifts under floodlights, a relentless, round-the-clock effort to will this dream into reality. Meanwhile, helicopters ferried wide-eyed investors overhead, giving them a breathtaking bird's-eye view of the dream taking shape below. Every single milestone, every completed dock or dredged channel triggered a new share issue. And almost miraculously, every new issue seemed to double the market value of his rapidly expanding empire. It was a masterfully engineered, self-perpetuating cycle of ambition, investment, and seemingly endless growth. By 2011, Eike Batista wasn't just a businessman. He had become the very face of Brazil's economic miracle. He was a national icon, a celebrity who dated supermodels, sponsored high-profile Formula One teams, and confidently guaranteed the press that he would soon overtake Carlos Slim as the richest man alive. His confidence was infectious, almost intoxicating, and it perfectly mirrored the optimism of a nation on the rise. When asked by a journalist about the inherent risks of his high-stakes ventures, he famously joked, "The biggest risk is not taking one." He leveraged everything he owned, and then some. His personal shares in his companies, the leases on his opulent yachts, even the future royalties from his yet-to-be-depleted gold mines. Banks, eager to be a part of the new Brazil story, practically competed to lend him money, throwing billions at his projects with startlingly little due diligence. Seasoned veteran engineers from the state oil giant Petrobras defected from their secure, prestigious positions to join his ambitious projects, lured by the promise of exponential growth and the magnetic pull of their charismatic leader. The Financial Times, a bastion of global financial credibility, crowned him the emblem of the new Brazil. But behind the scenes, far from the flashing cameras and the fawning headlines, insidious cracks were beginning to form in the foundation of his empire. OGX, his flagship oil company and the engine of his wealth, had boldly promised a robust 15,000 barrels a day from its first cluster of offshore wells. Yet, the initial drill results, the very tests meant to validate the entire enterprise, produced barely 5,000 barrels. It was a stark, terrifying discrepancy between the PowerPoint presentations and the physical reality. Independent engineers, those pragmatic voices of reason hired to consult, began to warn internally that the claimed reserves were highly speculative, perhaps even illusory. But each disappointing test, each failed well, was simply rebranded by Batista's slick marketing team as a technical upside. A clever Orwellian turn of phrase designed to spin failure into future potential. Unfazed, Batista, ever the optimist, simply raised his long-term production targets even higher and sold more shares to cover the escalating cash calls. The market, still utterly dazzled by the perceived barrels in the ground, and Batista's undeniable charm kept buying, seemingly oblivious to the growing chasm between his promise and reality. Then, with shocking speed, the tide began to turn. Commodity prices, the powerful current that had fueled so much of Batista's meteoric rise, peaked in 2011 and began their relentless slide the very next year. Iron ore futures, a cornerstone of his mining empire, plummeted a staggering 40%. Crude oil, the lifeblood of OGX, followed suit. Suddenly, investors, spooked by the global slowdown, weren't interested in promises anymore. They wanted cold, hard profits. The shift in market sentiment was brutal and immediate. OGX, already struggling under the weight of its own failed promises, missed its crucial output deadlines. Its share price, which had once soared over 12 Rs, imploded to under 1 Real in a mere 6 months, a dizzying, terrifying descent into penny stock territory. Credit rating agencies, seeing the writing on the wall, downgraded EBX debt to junk status, a damning indictment that triggered covenants, clauses in his loan agreements that demanded immediate, drastic action. These covenants forced Batista to begin selling off his precious assets in a desperate attempt to stay afloat. He tried to plug the ever-growing holes in his balance sheet by selling his MPX power plants to the German utility EON. But each divestiture, each painful sale, only seemed to reveal new, even larger funding gaps. It was like trying to patch a sieve with increasingly smaller bandages, while the water pressure intensified. In a desperate, almost quixotic move, he doubled down, personally injecting a staggering $1 billion of his own rapidly diminishing cash into the crumbling empire. He even auctioned off his cherished Lamborghini Aventador, a potent symbol of his lavish lifestyle, publicly claiming the money would help protect minority shareholders. The gesture, a masterstroke of public relations, bought him a few sympathetic headlines for a fleeting moment, but it did absolutely nothing to stem the financial bleeding. The stock rout, a relentless, unforgiving force, only accelerated, feeding on itself as fear turned to panic. The inevitable finally arrived in September 2013. OGX, once the shining star of his X-branded universe, defaulted on a $45 million bond coupon payment. It was the crack that brought the whole edifice tumbling down. Within days, trading was halted across the entire EBX group, a chilling, unambiguous sign of complete and total collapse. Creditors, their patience finally exhausted, seized 3 massive cargo ships anchored at his beloved Asu port, a stark, tangible symbol of Batista's crumbling empire. Bloomberg, the financial news giant, ran a grim, now famous chart showing Batista's fortune evaporating at an almost unbelievable rate, $1 million per hour. Imagine watching your life's work vanish at that speed. By December, the once unflappable Batista had to admit the unthinkable. His empire was in technical insolvency. His personal net worth, once a dizzying $30 billion, sank to a staggering negative $1 billion. He became the first ever Forbes 10-figure billionaire to cross the zero line and plunge deep into the red, a dubious and utterly unprecedented distinction. Media outlets that had once splashed his confident predictions across their front pages now unearthed damning internal emails. These messages painted a starkly different picture from the one he had sold to the public, revealing engineers desperately begging management to scale back their impossibly optimistic production targets. One internal message, chilling in its simplicity and prescience, read, "We are drilling dust." That haunting 3-word phrase quickly became a viral hashtag, #drilling dust, gleefully mocked by a public that now saw him not as a hero, but as a charlatan. It was a digital epitaph for a dream that had turned to dust. As if a historic financial collapse wasn't dramatic enough, as creditors circled the wreckage of his companies like vultures, federal prosecutors began unearthing an even darker subplot, one that went far beyond mere financial mismanagement. Leaked testimony from a sprawling nationwide corruption investigation, later dubbed Operation Car Wash, claimed Batista had paid a staggering $16 million in bribes to the former Rio de Janeiro governor, Sergio Cabral. In exchange for these illicit payments, The governor allegedly fast-tracked crucial environmental licenses for the Porto do Açu project, and even more egregiously, steered massive state pension funds toward risky EBX bonds, propping up Batista's companies with public money. It was a classic quid pro quo, a corrosive and illegal blend of politics and profit. Police wiretaps caught the two men, Batista and Cabral, chillingly joking about oil that doesn't float, a grim inside reference to the non-existent reserves that had underpinned so much of Batista's paper empire. When investigators finally raided Batista's opulent mansion, they found not just a lavish lifestyle, but 7 safes, 3 different passports, and a single solitary gold bar, ironically engraved with the very EBX logo that had come to symbolize both his astronomic rise and his spectacular fall. In early 2017, the legal hammer finally dropped. Eike Batista was convicted of bribery, money laundering, and market manipulation. The judge, in a stern rebuke to the corporate impunity that had long plagued Brazil, sentenced him to 30 years in prison and slapped him with a hefty fine of 53 million reais. Prosecutors, satisfied with the outcome, declared the sentence a warning that no executive is bigger than the market. It was a message meant to resonate far beyond the courtroom walls, a signal that the old ways of doing business were over. Batista spent the next 2 years under house arrest in his Rio mansion, a gilded cage that served as a stark contrast to his former life of private jets and globe-trotting glamour, while his appeals slowly, agonizingly crawled through the labyrinthine Brazilian court system. During this period of forced confinement, he systematically liquidated what was left of his personal assets, his sprawling Jardim Botanico estate, his valuable modern art collection, even his beloved German Shepherd kennel. It was a humbling, almost complete dismantling of a once grand personal empire, conducted piece by painful piece. Yet even in his downfall, he clung to one tantalizing secret, a whisper of a hidden fortune that added another layer to the drama: sensational claims by his ex-wife that he still secretly controlled an undeclared gold mine in Canada, far from the reach of Brazilian authorities. This revelation, a final, unexpected twist in an already incredible tale, prompted authorities to open a fresh probe, freezing the remaining family trust and, crucially, revoking his passport. The man who once dreamed of conquering the world was now, quite literally, grounded, unable to leave Brazil. In a rare reflective interview given during this period of legal limbo, he offered a poignant, if perhaps self-serving reflection on his journey. "I flew too close to the sun, but at least I flew." Critics and a jaded public were quick to dismiss the line as rehearsed hubris, another calculated attempt to spin his narrative, even in the face of abject defeat. Yet beneath the surface of the grand pronouncements, there's a quiet, almost poetic irony. Today, far from the spotlight, Batista quietly funds scholarships for a handful of geology students. His advice to them? It's simple, yet profound. Study rocks, not spreadsheets. It's a lesson he learned the hard way, a quiet testament to the enduring, unforgiving power of tangible assets over speculative dreams. The Eike Batista saga isn't just a dramatic cautionary tale for the ultra-rich. It's a living, breathing textbook case study in behavioral finance, a masterclass in how raw human psychology can warp and distort rational decision-making in the financial markets. Investors, both small-time retail and sophisticated institutions, were blinded by his charisma and the intoxicating allure of exponential growth. They conflated Batista's undeniable charm and salesmanship with genuine operational competence. They projected his seemingly limitless expansion into perpetuity, completely ignoring the fundamental, sobering base rate probabilities for dry well exploration in the oil industry. In essence, they believed the story far more than they scrutinized the numbers. Meanwhile, one man, Eike Batista himself, masterfully exploited this narrative momentum, successfully monetizing hope itself. He sold a vision, a powerful dream of a prosperous new Brazil, and investors around the world bought it hook, line, and sinker. But when the macroeconomic winds shifted, when commodity prices finally rolled over, that positive feedback loop reversed with brutal, unforgiving efficiency. Optimism, once his greatest asset, became his gravest liability as the same momentum that carried him to the stratosphere sent him hurtling back to earth. The fallout from his collapse has left a deep and lasting scar on Brazilian markets, but it also brought about necessary change. Regulators, now wiser and infinitely warier, demand escrow accounts for reserve estimates and mandate independent third-party audits for new public offerings, ensuring a layer of scrutiny that was sorely lacking during Batista's heyday. They've tightened disclosure rules, making executives personally and financially liable for their forward-looking hype, effectively putting their own money on the line for their grand pronouncements. In the financial centers of Sao Paulo and Rio, analysts have dubbed these crucial reforms the Batista effect, proof positive that sometimes the most profound and effective teacher is a spectacular, unforgettable failure. Eike Batista promised investors the entire ocean, a vast blue water expanse of opportunity and unimaginable wealth. In the end, however, he delivered little more than a muddy puddle of broken promises and worthless stock certificates. His initial spectacular rise was undeniably fueled by an audacious vision and a brand of relentless ambition rarely seen. But his equally spectacular fall, that was baked into a dangerous cocktail of reckless leverage, opaque and self-serving accounting practices, and, perhaps most fatally, a deeply held belief that the story he told mattered infinitely more than the cold, hard numbers on a balance sheet. His tale is a stark reminder that gravity always wins and that charisma is not collateral. If tonight's deep dive into this incredible tale reminds you that in the world of investing, due diligence never, ever goes out of style, do us a favor. Hit that like button and share it with a friend who still finds themselves chasing the next big thing without reading the fine print. Subscribe for more gripping stories where ambition meets the often harsh reality of the market. And don't forget to drop a comment below telling us which other fallen tycoon or corporate titan you want us to profile next.